It was a sunny Wednesday afternoon in Lyon when I received the call from my mother-in-law, Marguerite. A phone call that would trigger an unexpected adventure. His voice, cheerful as usual, informed me that our flight to Corsica was scheduled for 6 p.m. the next day. I quickly checked my emails looking for the itinerary, but finding nothing, I decided to trust his experience in planning family trips. The next day, I arrived at Saint-Exupéry Airport well ahead of schedule, excited about this family vacation. Summer was in full swing, and the airport was bustling with travelers eager to jet off to sunny destinations. As I approached the check-in counter, an unpleasant feeling came over me. The stewardess, a young woman with blonde hair tied in a bun, informed me with a sympathetic look that the flight had already taken off. Confused and slightly panicked, I frantically checked my messages. And then I saw it, a text from my mother-in-law. "Oops, looks like I had the wrong time, lol." At the time, I thought it was a bad joke, but knowing Marguerite, it was just another one of her innocent blunders. I could almost hear her laughing on the other end of the phone, oblivious to the stress she had just caused me. So here I am alone at the airport, having to make a quick decision. I could either let this incident ruin the trip or find another way to reach Corsica. I opted for the second option, determined not to miss this long-awaited vacation. After all, it wasn't every day that we had the opportunity to escape from the hustle and bustle of life in Lyon to enjoy the sun and Corsican beaches. I headed towards the reservations office, weaving between suitcases and busy families. The queue seemed endless, but I had no choice. While I waited, I thought about the best way to break the news to my wife, Sophie, who was already on her way to Bastia Airport with the rest of the family. After what seemed like an eternity, I was finally able to speak to an agent. Fortunately, there was still a place on a flight leaving in a few hours. The price was exorbitant, but it was my only option. I booked the ticket, with a heavy heart but relieved to have found a solution. With several hours to kill before my new flight, I decided to explore the airport. I stopped at a small cafe to have an espresso and call Sophie. As expected, she was furious with her mother, but relieved that I had found a solution. She promised to wait for me at Bastia Airport, no matter what time I arrived. Time passed slowly. I wandered around duty-free stores, flipping through magazines and trying perfumes to pass the time. I ended up buying a book on the history of Corsica, thinking that it might be interesting for the trip. Finally, boarding time arrived. I boarded the plane, exhausted but relieved. The flight was turbulent, as if the sky itself wanted to add to the difficulty of this day. I tried to concentrate on my book, learning about ancient Corsican customs and the natural beauties of the island I would soon discover. The plane landed in Bastia late in the evening. The warm, fragrant Mediterranean air greeted me as soon as I stepped out of the aircraft. Despite the fatigue, I felt excitement rising within me. I had finally arrived. In the airport hall, I immediately spotted Sophie. She looked tired but smiling. We hugged each other, happy to finally be reunited after this eventful day. She informed me that the rest of the family was waiting for us at the villa we had rented near St. Florent. During the car ride, Sophie told me how their arrival went. Apparently, my mother-in-law felt terribly guilty and kept apologizing. The rest of the family wavered between amusement and exasperation at the situation. The winding road along the coast offered spectacular views of the sea, even in the dark. I could already feel the stress of the day evaporating, replaced by the anticipation of 2 weeks of relaxation and exploration. We arrived at the villa shortly before midnight. Despite the late hour, the whole family was still up, waiting for me. My mother-in-law was the first to greet me, apologetic. I couldn't help but laugh and hug her, assuring her that everything was okay. The rest of the evening was spent catching up over a glass of Corsican wine and local charcuterie. We laughed about the incident, already turning it into a family anecdote that would no doubt be told for years to come. As I finally went to bed, exhausted but happy, I realized that this mishap had actually set the perfect tone for our vacation. She reminded us of the importance of flexibility, forgiveness, and humor in the face of the unexpected. And then, what better way to start a stay in Corsica than with a little adventure? The next morning, I woke up to the sound of cicadas and the smell of the Corsican scrub. The day promised to be magnificent, promising new discoveries and wonderful family moments. Despite the chaotic start, I was sure this vacation was going to be memorable. The next morning, I was awakened by the rays of the sun filtering through the shutters of our room. The air was already hot, heavy with the scents of the Corsican marquee. I stretched lazily, savoring this quiet moment before the day really began. Sophie was still sleeping next to me, tired from the emotions of the day before. I decided to let her rest and discreetly went out onto the terrace of our villa. The view before me was breathtaking. The Mediterranean Sea stretched as far as the eye could see, its deep blue waters sparkling in the morning sun. In the distance, I could see the mountainous contours of Cap Corse. I went down to the kitchen, where I found my mother-in-law, Marguerite, already busy preparing breakfast. She seemed to have regained her usual good humor, softly humming a Corsican song that she must have heard on the local radio. "Ah, Pierre, you're already up," she exclaimed when she saw me. "I hope you slept well despite, well, you know." She gave a little embarrassed laugh, referring to the mishap of the day before. I reassured her with a smile. "Don't worry, Marguerite. It's already forgotten. Besides, it'll make a good story to tell, right?" She seemed relieved and handed me a cup of coffee. "Here, taste this. It's Corsican coffee, as strong as it should be." I took a sip and immediately felt the energy returning to me. It was indeed a powerful coffee, with woody notes and a pleasant bitterness. As we discussed plans for the day, the rest of the family began to get up and join us. My father-in-law, Jean-Claude, arrived last, still looking sleepy but smiling. "So, young people, ready for a lazy day at the beach?" The idea was received with enthusiasm by everyone. We spent the next hour getting ready, gathering towels, sunscreen, and a picnic. Sophie insisted that we also bring masks and snorkels, having heard about the magnificent seabed in the area. Around 10 a.m. we were finally ready to leave. We piled into 2 cars and took the winding road that led to Salea Beach, reputed to be one of the most beautiful in Corsica. The journey was an adventure in itself. The narrow road snaked through the scrub, at times offering spectacular views of the sea below. After an hour of driving and a few scares in the tightest turns, we finally arrived at our destination. Salea Beach stretched out before us, a crescent of white sand bordered by turquoise waters. Despite its reputation, it was surprisingly uncrowded, probably due to its difficult access. We set cled near a grove of umbrella pines which offered a little shade. The children immediately rushed into the water, squealing with delight at the coolness of the sea. Sophie and I followed more calmly, enjoying the feeling of the warm sand beneath our feet. The water was crystal clear. With our masks on, we could see schools of small silver fish swimming around us. Further on, we even saw a starfish resting on the sandy bottom. It was like swimming in a giant aquarium. After our swim, we joined the rest of the family on the beach. Marguerite had brought out the picnic, well-filled pan bagnats, a tomato and mozzarella salad, and fresh fruit. She even remembered to bring a bottle of chilled Corsican rosé. While we ate, Jean-Claude told us stories about Corsica, its turbulent history and traditions. He spoke to us about blood feuds, these family vengeances which have long marked the history of the island, but also about polyphonic songs and the pride of the Corsicans for their land. The afternoon passed quietly, between swimming, naps in the shade of the pine trees, and impromptu games of boule. As the sun began to set, tinting the sky pink and orange, we decided to return to the villa. On the way back, we stopped at a small hilltop village to buy fresh bread and some local specialties for dinner. The village square was bustling, with groups of men playing pétanque and children running between cafe tables. Back at the villa, after a refreshing shower, we all found ourselves on the terrace to enjoy the balmy summer evening. Jean-Claude had lit the barbecue and was grilling Corsican sausages while Marguerite prepared a vegetable salad from the garden. That's when my phone started ringing incessantly. I glanced at the screen and saw a series of messages and missed calls from Marguerite. Surprised, I turned to her, but she was busy setting the table and didn't seem to have tried to contact me. Intrigued, I opened the messages. "Where are you?" "We need to talk," said the last one. I showed the phone to Sophie, who shrugged, just as perplexed as I was. "Marguerite," I called, "have you tried to reach me?" She looked up from her work, looking confused. No, why? I showed him the messages. His face went from confusion to surprise to an expression I'd never seen on him before, fear. Oh no, she whispered. Oh no, no, no. The whole family had now gathered around us, sensing that something was wrong. Marguerite seemed to be struggling to find her words. There's something I haven't told you, she began slowly. Something about the journey. We were all hanging on his lips, waiting for what happened next. What else could there be after the robbery fiasco? I may have made a little mistake booking the villa, she continued. I thought I was booked for 2 weeks, but actually, it might only be for a week. A stunned silence fell on the terrace. Jean-Claude was the first to break it. But anyway, Marguerite, how is this possible? He asked, incredulous. She wrung her hands, visibly uncomfortable. I don't know. I must have made a mistake when filling out the online form. I only realized it last night when I received a confirmation email. Sophie took a deep breath, obviously trying to stay calm. And you couldn't tell us about it sooner? I didn't want to ruin our first day, Marguerite replied in a small voice. I was hoping to find a solution before. I felt the tension building in the group. The children looked at us with wide, worried eyes, not entirely understanding what was happening but sensing that something was wrong. It was then that I realized that it was up to me to defuse the situation. After all, hadn't I promised to be more flexible in the face of unforeseen circumstances? Listen, I said, getting everyone's attention. I know it's not ideal, but it's not the end of the world either. We still have a whole week ahead of us to enjoy Corsica. And for the second week, well, let's improvise. I saw relief appear on Marguerite's face. Sophie shook my hand, grateful for my intervention. Pierre is right, Jean-Claude added. We're on vacation, right? So let's make the most of it and see how things turn out. Little by little, the atmosphere relaxed. We returned to the table, the topic of conversation naturally shifting to our plans for the rest of the week. Marguerite remained silent for a moment, but eventually joined the discussion, shyly offering ideas for excursions. Later in the evening, when everyone had gone to bed, I stayed on the terrace, gazing at the stars. Sophie joined me, putting her arm around my waist. You handled the situation well, she said softly. I smile. I learned from the best. Aren't you the one who always tells me that I have to know how to adapt? She laughed softly. That's true. But I wonder what we're going to do for the second week. I shrugged my shoulders. Who knows? Maybe this is the chance to experience a new adventure. After all, the best stories often start with something unexpected, right? Sophie nodded, resting her head on my shoulder. Together we watched the moon reflect on the sea, anticipating with excitement mixed with apprehension what the days to come would hold for us. The next morning, I woke up with my mind still foggy from the revelations of the day before. The Corsican sun, already high in the sky, flooded our room with golden light. Sophie was still sleeping, her peaceful face betraying none of the worries that awaited us. I silently went down to the kitchen, where I found Jean-Claude preparing coffee. He greeted me with a nod, looking tired. Slept poorly? I asked as I sat down at the table. He sighed. Let's just say I've been thinking about it quite a bit. This whole reservation thing, it's putting us in quite a bind. I nodded, fully understanding his concern. We'll figure it out, I said, trying to sound more confident than I really was. Little by little, the rest of the family joined us. The atmosphere was tense, with everyone carefully avoiding mentioning the elephant in the room. Marguerite, in particular, seemed to have lost all her usual joviality. After breakfast, we met in the living room to discuss the situation. Sophie, always pragmatic, had already started researching on her phone. I looked at availability at hotels and rentals in the area, she announced. Unfortunately, it's high season and almost everything is sold out. A heavy silence settled. The children, feeling the tension, exchanged worried looks. How about we just go home after the first week? Marguerite suggested timidly. Jean-Claude shook his head. No. We all took 2 weeks off. It would be a shame to waste it. It was then that an idea crossed my mind. What if we saw this as an opportunity rather than a problem? I suggested. All eyes turned to me, intrigued. We could turn this into a road trip. Explore other parts of the island that we wouldn't have seen otherwise. The idea seemed to make its way into people's minds. I saw a glimmer of interest light up in Sophie's eyes. It's not stupid, she said slowly. We could rent a campervan and tour Corsica. The children, until then silent, suddenly became animated at this idea. Oh yes, exclaimed Leah, our eldest daughter. Like a great adventure. Little by little, enthusiasm spread throughout the family. Even Marguerite, who still felt guilty, began to smile shyly. We spent the rest of the morning coming up with a plan. Sophie took care of finding a camper van to rent, while Jean-Claude and I began drawing a route on a map of Corsica. The children, excited by this prospect of adventure, came up with ideas for activities and places to visit. Around noon, while we were all absorbed in our preparations, the villa telephone rang. Marguerite answered the phone, exchanged a few words, then looked at us with a strange expression. He was the owner of the villa, she announced. There was a misunderstanding. We all held our breath, fearing another complication. In fact, Marguerite continued, I had booked for 2 weeks. It was he who made a mistake in his planning. A mixture of relief and confusion took hold of us. On the one hand, we no longer had to worry about finding accommodation for the second week. On the other hand, we had just spent the morning planning a trip that was no longer necessary. So, what do we do? Asked Lucas, our youngest son, expressing out loud what we were all thinking quietly. A silence fell as we thought about the situation. It was Sophie who ended up breaking it. You know what? She said with a mischievous smile. We could still do it, this road trip. His suggestion was met with surprised looks. But we have the villa, Jean-Claude began. Yes, Sophie agreed, but we also have an adventure plan that sounds pretty exciting to me. Why not compromise? We keep the villa as our base and go on excursions for a few days with the campervan. The idea made its way into our minds. It was indeed the best of both worlds, the comfort of the villa and the adventure of travel. Sounds perfect, I agreed, smiling at my wife. What do you think, children? Leah and Lucas exchanged a look before exclaiming in unison, great idea. Marguerite, who had remained silent until then, spoke. I'm sorry for all the confusion, she said softly. But I'm glad it led us to this idea. It promises to be a memorable vacation. Jean-Claude put an arm around his wife's shoulders. Don't worry, darling. As they say, all's well that ends well. The afternoon was spent refining our new plan. We decided to spend a few more days in the villa to enjoy the beach and the surrounding area, then leave for a 4-day mini road trip through Corsica, before returning to the villa for the end of the stay. Sophie manages to find a campervan to rent from an agency in Bastia. Jean-Claude and I looked at the map, plotting a route that would take us through the mountainous interior of the island, its perched villages and its chestnut forests. Meanwhile, Marguerite was busy in the kitchen, preparing a feast for dinner as if to make amends. The tempting smell of a Corsican olive stew soon began to invade the house. In the evening, we all found ourselves on the terrace, enjoying the delicious meal prepared by Marguerite and animatedly discussing our plans. The atmosphere was joyous, full of anticipation for the adventures to come. As the sun set, tinting the sky pink and orange, I couldn't help but think how strange this day had been. What started as a problem had turned into an exciting opportunity. I realized that it was often in these unexpected moments that the best memories were born. Later in the evening, when the children had gone to bed and Jean-Claude and Marguerite had retired to their room, Sophie and I remained on the terrace, sipping a glass of Corsican muscat. You know, Sophie said, looking up at the stars, I'm almost glad there was all this confusion. I looked at her, surprised. Really? She nodded. It forced us to step out of our comfort zone, to be creative. This vacation is going to be much more interesting than we initially planned. I smiled, realizing she was right. It's true. And then, it reminded us of the importance of being flexible, of knowing how to adapt. Sophie rested her head on my shoulder. Exactly. It's a great lesson for the kids too. We stayed like that for a while, enjoying the calm of the Corsican night, the sound of the waves below lulling our thoughts. I thought about all the events that had led us to this moment, the missed flight, the booking confusion, and now this impromptu road trip plan. Every obstacle had turned into a new opportunity. "What are you thinking about?" Sophie asked gently. "I told myself that life is full of surprises," I replied. "And that sometimes the best things happen when you least expect them." She nodded, squeezing my hand in hers. "That's what makes life exciting, right?" As we prepared for bed, I took one last look at the sea glistening under the moon. Tomorrow would be the start of a new adventure, one that we had not planned but which promised to be memorable. And wasn't that the very essence of vacation? Get out of your routine, have unexpected experiences, create memories that would last a lifetime. It was with this comforting thought that I fell asleep that night, eager to see what the days to come would hold. The next days passed like a dream. We took full advantage of the villa and the beach, while enthusiastically preparing our mini road trip through Corsica. The excitement was palpable, especially among the children who only talked about our future adventure. The morning of our departure finally arrived. We all got up at dawn, the cool air of the early morning already carrying the promise of a hot summer day. The house was bustling with activity, everyone busy gathering their things and loading the campervan we had rented the day before. "Don't forget the hats," Marguerite called back for the umpteenth time, while Jean-Claude checked the tire pressure one last time. After a last look at the villa which had been our haven of peace in recent days, we hit the road. Our first destination was the hilltop village of Sant'Antonino, considered one of the most beautiful villages in Corsica. The journey was an adventure in itself. The island's winding roads offered us breathtaking views at every turn. The children marveled at the changing landscapes, from sandy beaches to dense forests to rugged mountains. We arrived in Sant'Antonino late in the morning. The village, perched on a rocky outcrop, seemed to emerge from the mountain itself. Its narrow, cobbled streets instantly transported us to another era. "It's like a fairy tale," exclaimed Leah, amazed by the old stone houses. We spent the afternoon exploring the village, stopping at a small trattoria to taste Corsican specialties. The owner, a jovial man with a strong accent, told us the history of the village and its legends. As the sun began to set, we hit the road again, heading towards a campsite near the Visivona forest where we planned to spend the night. The atmosphere in the campervan was joyful, with everyone sharing their impressions of this first day of adventure. We arrived at the campsite at nightfall. The place was nestled in the heart of the forest, surrounded by tall pines and century-old oaks. The cool mountain air was a welcome change after the heat of the day. While Jean-Claude and I set up the campervan, Sophie and Marguerite prepared a simple but delicious dinner, a Corsican salad with brocciu, local ham, and fresh figures. We ate outside, under the stars, listening to the cicadas singing and the leaves rustling in the night breeze. After dinner, as we were thinking about getting ready for the night, Lucas had an idea. "How about we make a campfire?" The idea was received with enthusiasm. We spent the next half hour gathering dry wood and preparing a circle of stones for the fire. Jean-Claude, proud of his skills as a scout, took charge of lighting the fire. Soon the flames were dancing happily, casting moving shadows across our faces. We sat in a circle around the fire, enjoying its comforting warmth in the cool of the night. "It's the perfect time for ghost stories," Leah suggested with a mischievous smile. Marguerite shivered theatrically. "Oh no, no scary stories for me. What if we told family stories instead?" Sophie suggested. "Any funny anecdotes or special memories?" The idea was received with enthusiasm. Jean-Claude began, telling us how he met Marguerite during a train trip gone wrong. Their suitcases got mixed up, leading to a series of hilarious misunderstandings before they eventually fell in love. Marguerite continued with the story of the birth of Sophie, who had almost been born in a taxi in the middle of a Paris traffic jam. We laughed out loud imagining the scene. Then it was my turn. I decided to share the story of my marriage proposal to Sophie, which had not gone at all as planned. I had planned a romantic picnic in a park, but a sudden downpour forced us to take shelter under a bandstand. It was there, soaked to the skin but laughing like crazy, that I knelt down and took out the ring. I remember thinking that if she said yes despite these circumstances, she would really be the woman of my life, I concluded, looking at Sophie tenderly. She smiles back at me, her eyes sparkling in the firelight. And I haven't regretted my decision for a single moment, she said softly. The children, fascinated by these stories that they had never heard, asked for more. We spent several hours sharing anecdotes, happy memories, and even some difficult moments that we had overcome together. As the evening progressed, I realized how precious these simple moments were. Here, far from our daily lives, surrounded by the wild beauty of Corsica, we reconnect not only with nature, but also with each other. As the night wore on and the fire began to die down, an idea came to me. I got up and went to get my guitar from the camper. When I returned, the whole family looked at me with curiosity. It's been a while since I've played, I said as I sat down, but I think it's the perfect time for a little song. I began to gently strum the strings, playing a melody I had composed years ago for Sophie. It was a simple song, about love, family, and the happiness found in the little moments of life. To my surprise, Sophie joined in, softly humming the melody she had learned over the years. Soon, the whole family was swaying to the rhythm of the music, Marguerite and Jean-Claude holding hands, the children curled up against them. When the song ended, a comfortable silence fell, broken only by the crackling of the last embers of the fire. "It was beautiful, Dad," Leah whispered, her eyes shining. I felt my heart swell with happiness. This moment, as simple as it was perfect. It was for moments like this that we traveled, that we broke out of our routine, to create memories that would stay in our hearts forever. Soon after, we decided it was time to go to sleep. The children, exhausted but happy, snuggled into their sleeping bags inside the camper. Marguerite and Jean-Claude chose to sleep in the tent they had set up earlier. Sophie and I opted to sleep under the stars. We spread our sleeping bags near the still warm ashes of the fire, enjoying the clear, starry night. Lying side by side, watching the Milky Way spread out above us, we spoke in hushed tones about the day, our plans for the rest of the trip, and our lives in general. "You know," Sophie said after a moment of silence, "I think this vacation is exactly what we needed. Not just to relax, but to remind us what's really important." I turned my head to look at her. Her profile was softly lit by the glow of the moon, and I was struck once again by her beauty, both exterior and interior. "You're right," I replied. "It's easy to get lost in the everyday, to forget to take the time to appreciate what we have." She nodded, snuggling closer to me. "Promise me we won't forget this when we get back. That we'll continue to create moments like this, even in our everyday lives." "I promise," I said solemnly, sealing the promise with a gentle kiss. We thus stayed for a long time, listening to the noises of the forest, feeling the fresh breeze on our skin, simply taking advantage of the presence of each other. Little by little, lulled by the calm of the night, we fell asleep under the starry sky of Corsica. That night, I had peaceful dreams, filled with images of our family, laughter, and moments of simple happiness. And even in my sleep, I knew that this trip had already brought us much more than what we could have imagined. The next morning, I woke up by the first rays of the sun caressing my face. The fresh air of the mountain was invigorating, loaded with the scents of pine and maki. Sophie was still sleeping peacefully next to me, a slight smile floating on her lips. I got up slowly, taking care not to wake her up, and stretched myself by contemplating the landscape around us. The Visavona forest extended as far as the eye can see, its majestic trees proudly standing towards the clear blue sky. In the distance, I saw the snow-capped peaks of the Cinto Monte, the culmination of Corsica. Deciding to let the rest of the family sleep, I headed for a small stream that I had spotted the day before. The ice water invigorated me completely when I sprinkled with my face. Sitting on a rock by the water, I took a few moments to meditate, savoring the calm and beauty of this Corsican morning. When I returned to the camp, I found Marguerite already busy preparing breakfast. She greeted me with a warm smile. "Walk well, Pierre?" she asked, holding me a cup of smoking coffee. "Like a Loire," I replied, gratifying the hot drink with gratitude. "And you?" She gave a little laugh. "Oh, sleeping in the tent at our age is no longer easy. But experience was worth it." Little by little, the rest of the family emerged from their sleep. We took our breakfast together, chatting with animation of our projects for the day. We had planned to hike in the Visavona forest, renowned for its magnificent trails and refreshing waterfalls. As we finished putting out the camp, Marguerite took me apart. She seemed nervous, playing distractedly with the pendant she wore around her neck. "Pierre, I have to tell you about something," she started in a hesitant voice. Intrigued, I encouraged him with a head sign. She took a deep inspiration before continuing. "Do you remember the confusion with the flight at the start of the trip? How could I have forgotten it?" I nodded, asking myself where she was coming from. "Well," she continued, "it was not really a mistake on my part." I looked at her, perplexed. "What do you mean?" She looked down, visibly uncomfortable. "I deliberately gave a bad hour of departure. I wanted you to have a little time for you before joining the family." I was stunned. "But why?" Marguerite looked up at me, a mixture of guilt and affection in her gaze. "I have been watching you for a while, Pierre. You work so hard, always taking care of everyone. I thought you deserved a just moment for you, a little solo adventure before diving into the family holidays." I stayed silent for a moment, assimilating this revelation. On the one hand, I was touched by his intention. On the other, I could not help feeling a point of annoyance in the face of this well-intentioned manipulation. "I know it was bad on my part," she continued, interpreting my silence. "I should have told you directly if I thought you needed time for you. I'm sorry." I took a deep breath, trying to sort out my thoughts. "I understand your intention, Marguerite," I said finally. "But you are right, you should have told me about it. This kind of manipulation, even well-intentioned, can have unforeseen consequences." She nodded, the air contrite. "I know. I realized it when I saw how stressed you were at the airport. It was not at all what I wanted." I put a hand on her shoulder, feeling my frustration fade. "The important thing is that everything ended well. And I suppose that in a way, this mishap has helped make this journey memorable." A little smile appeared on his face. "It's true. And look where we are now, to camp in the great outdoors like a bunch of adventurers." We rose together, the tension dissipating. However, while we returned to the rest of the family, a question still trotted me in my head. "Marguerite," I asked, "the confusion with the reservation of the villa, was it as intentional?" She vigorously shook her head. "Oh no, that was a real mistake. I'm not so Machiavellian, you know." I could not help laughing at his indignant expression. "Okay, I believe you." The rest of the day went wonderfully well. Our hike in the Visavona forest was an enchantment. The shaded trails led us through breathtaking landscapes, going from dense forests to sunny clearings, then tumultuous waterfalls where we stopped to picnic and bathe. The children were particularly enthusiastic, running from one point of interest to another, marveling in front of each new discovery. Even Jean-Claude, usually little fond of hiking, seemed to appreciate the experience, often stopping to take photos. Throughout the day, I couldn't help but rethink the revelation of Marguerite. I observed my family, realizing how many of them tried in their own way of taking care of others. Sophie, always attentive to everyone's needs. Jean-Claude, with his humor which relaxed the atmosphere in moments of tension. The children, with their contagious enthusiasm that constantly reminded us of enjoying the present moment. And Marguerite, despite her sometimes clumsy methods, only sought to make sure everyone is happy. I understood then that it was this mutual benevolence, this desire to take care of each other, which was the strength of our family. In the evening, back to the motorhome, we were all exhausted but happy. After a simple but delicious dinner, made up of local products purchased in a small village market, we settled outside to enjoy the sweetness of the evening. It was then that I decided to share my conversation with Marguerite. I thought it was important to be honest with the whole family, and perhaps this revelation could open an interesting discussion. When I finished telling, silence settled. Sophie was the first to break it. "I understand Marguerite's intention," she said slowly, "even if I do not agree with the method. But that raises an important question. Do we take care of ourselves, individually?" This reflection triggered a long conversation. Everyone shared their thoughts on the balance between individual needs and those of the family. We realized that too often, we neglected our own needs for the benefit of those of others. Perhaps we should establish regular moments when everyone can do something only for themselves, suggested Jean-Claude. You don't have to be long or complicated, just a moment to recharge your batteries. The idea was greeted with enthusiasm. Even children understood the importance of this concept, offering ideas on how they could have their own moments of time for themselves. While the discussion continued, I was struck by the maturity and the wisdom that our family showed. This trip had not only brought us closer, but also allowed us to grow together, to understand us better and to strengthen our links. Later in the evening, when the children were lying down and Jean-Claude and Marguerite had withdrawn in their tent, Sophie and I stayed outside, contemplating the starry sky. You know, she said, snuggling against me, I think these holidays brought us much more than rest and change of scenery. I nodded, fully understanding what she meant. It is true. They allowed us to rediscover ourselves, as individuals and as a family. Sophie smiles. And to say that it all started with a misunderstanding at the time of a flight. Sometimes the best things arise from the most unexpected situations. I could only agree. This Corsican adventure, with all its ups and downs, its surprises and its revelations, had proven to be exactly what we needed. She had reminded us of the importance of adaptability, honest communication, and above all, love and mutual support that united us. As we prepared to go to sleep, I felt deeply grateful. Recognizing for my family, for this trip, and even for the little unforeseen events that had made this experience so rich and memorable. Tomorrow would be our last day of road trip before returning to the villa. I was impatient to see what new adventures and what new lessons were waiting for us. One thing was certain, we would face them together, stronger and more united than ever. The last day of our road trip began with particular energy. We all knew that it was our last day of adventure before returning to the villa, and we were determined to take full advantage of it. After a quick breakfast, we took the road towards Corte, the former capital of Corsica located in the heart of the island. The journey was magnificent, winding through the steep mountains and the green valleys. The children marveled in front of the perched villages which seemed to challenge gravity, hung on the sides of the mountains. Arrived in Corte, we were immediately seized by the unique atmosphere of the city. With its cobbled alleys and stone houses, Corte seemed frozen in time, proud guard of Corsican history and culture. We started our visit by the citadel, perched on a rocky spur dominating the city. The climb was tough, but the view from the summit was worth much. From up there, we could see the whole city and the surrounding mountains. It's incredible, whispered Sophie, the breath cut by the beauty of the landscape. Jean-Claude, passionate about history, told us how Corte had been the cradle of Corsican independence in the 18th century, under the direction of Pascal Paoli. His story even captured children, who usually were not very fond of history lessons. After visiting the citadel, we wandered through the narrow streets of the old town. The atmosphere was lively, with cafes, terraces filled with premises and tourists, and local craft shops where Marguerite could not help making some purchases. For lunch, we stopped in a small trattoria recommended by a resident. The owner, a Corsica with a singing accent, welcomed us warmly and made us taste local specialties, Corsican cold cuts, sheep cheese, and of course, the famous Corsican soup, the polenta. During the meal, we discussed our trip, sharing our favorite moments and the lessons we had learned from it. I believe that what I appreciated the most, said Leah, our eldest daughter, is to discover a new way of traveling. It's not just to visit places, it's really to live experiences. Lucas, the youngest, nodded vigorously. Yes. And I loved sleeping in the motorhome. It was like a great adventure every evening. Jean-Claude smiled at his grandchildren. You know, when I was young, I dreamed of making a trip like this. But life has passed, and I never took the time. I am happy that we could do it all together. Marguerite took the hand of her husband, shiny eyes. Better late than ever, my darling. And who knows, it may be just the beginning of our adventures. After lunch, we decided to make a last getaway before hitting the road to the villa. A room told us about a magnificent waterfall, accessible after a short hike. The idea of a refreshing swimming tried us all. The path led to the waterfall was shaded, bordered by green oaks and Lauricio pines. The air was filled with the song of the cicadas and the scent of the maki. Despite the fatigue accumulated in recent days, we were walking with a good step, impatient to discover this last wonder. When we finally arrived at the waterfall, we were all speechless. Crystalline water fell into successive waterfalls in a natural turquoise blue basin. The place seemed almost unreal, like out of a fairy tale. Without hesitation, the children undressed and plunged into fresh water, pushing cries of joy. Sophie and I quickly, while Jean-Claude and Marguerite preferred to dip their feet at the edge. The water was invigorating, washing the fatigue of our body and our mind. We played like children, splashing, plunging, laughing out. It was a moment of pure joy, simple and perfect. As we rest on the rocks after our swim, I was struck by an achievement. This trip had offered us much more than just vacation. It had allowed us to reconnect, not only to each other, but also to ourselves and the nature surrounded by us. I shared this thought with my family, and everyone agreed, adding their own perspective. "It's true," said Sophie. "I feel like regenerated. Not just rested, but really renewed." Jean-Claude nodded. "I think it is the spirit of Corsica. This island has something special, a force that touches you to the deepest." "Maybe that's it, real luxury," added Marguerite. "Not five-star hotels or gourmet restaurants, but these simple moments, in harmony with nature and those we love." His words resonated in each of us. We stayed a silent moment, contemplating the waterfall and reflecting on everything we had experienced. Finally, it was time to leave. The return to the villa was made in a gentle and contemplative atmosphere. Everyone seemed lost in their thoughts, assimilating the experiences of the last days. When we arrived at the villa, the sun began to bed, painting the sky with orange and pink colors. We discharged the motorhome in silence, tired but deeply satisfied. That night, after a light dinner on the terrace, we all found ourselves in the living room. Without anyone explicitly offering it, we started to share our reflections on this trip. "I think this adventure taught me the importance of getting out of my comfort zone," started Sophie. "I was worried at first, with all these plans changes, but ultimately, these unforeseen events made the trip so special." Jean-Claude granted. "For me, it was a lesson in humility. I realized that I was perhaps not as old as I thought. There are still so many things to discover, so many adventures to live." Marguerite then spoke. "This trip reminded me of the importance of honest communication. I understood that my little manipulations, even well-intentioned, could have unexpected consequences. In the future, I will trust our ability to us more understand and support each other." Children also had their reflections to share. Leah spoke of her wonder in the face of the beauty of nature and her desire to protect her. Lucas, he spoke of the pleasure he had taken to discover new things every day and how it made him want to be more curious in his daily life. When my turn came, I took a moment to collect my thoughts. "This trip reminded me of the importance of balance," I said finally. "Balance between planning and spontaneity, in the meantime with family and moments for oneself, between comfort and adventure. I think it is something that we should try to keep in mind once returned home." We spent a long time to discuss, laughing from the anecdotes of the trip, making plans for the future. The idea of making such adventures a family tradition was mentioned and welcomed with enthusiasm. Finally, exhausted but our hearts full, we went to bed. That night, lying in the bed next to Sophie, I thought back to everything we had experienced. The failed flight, confusion with the reservation, our improvised mini road trip. Each obstacle had turned into an opportunity to grow and get closer. I realized that this trip to Corsica had been much more than a simple parenthesis in our daily life. It had been a catalyst, allowing us to redefine our priorities, to strengthen our family ties, and to rediscover the joy of simple things. While I sank into sleep, I felt a deep gratitude for me. Gratitude for my family, for this trip, for learned lessons. And above all, gratitude for the spirit of Corsica, this magnificent island which had brought us so much. On the following days, we took full advantage of our last week at the villa. But something had changed. We discussed each day with a new state of mind, seeking to capture a little of the magic of our improvised adventure. When the moment came to return home, it was with a mixture of sadness and excitement. Sadness to leave this wonderful island, but excitement at the idea of applying in our daily life everything we had learned. On the ferry that brought us back to the continent, I looked at the Corsican coast slowly moving away. I knew that we took with us much more than memories. We took a new philosophy of life, a new look at what really matters. And while the island disappeared on the horizon, I made a silent promise. That of keeping this spirit of adventure, spontaneity, and wonder that Corsica had instilled in us. Because after all, the greatest adventure is life itself, with all its surprises and its moments of grace.